The scorching Lagos sun reflected off the mirrored glass of Ivory Tower, the most imposing skyscraper in Nigeria's financial capital. On the 45th floor, Adebayo Okonkwo adjusted his Italian silk tie as he admired the city skyline stretching as far as the eye could see. At 32, he was the youngest CFO in the history of Continental Investments, a Pan-African conglomerate with investments in more than a dozen countries across the continent. Mr. Okonkwo, the guests are waiting in the conference hall, his assistant announced, interrupting his contemplation. Adebayo smiled with satisfaction. Today was his day of triumph. After leading the most profitable acquisition in the company's history, surpassing all previous records, he would be formally announced as the successor to the CEO who was due to retire next year. The conference hall was teeming with the presence of Africa's business elite. Politicians, bankers, and businessmen sipped imported champagne as they discussed the latest oil market fluctuations. Adebayo entered with a firm and confident stride, selectively greeting only those whose connections he deemed useful to his future goals. "And here's the man of the hour," exclaimed the current CEO, Mr. Oluwasegun, a 65-year-old man with graying hair and an impeccable suit. "The future of Continental Investments." Applause filled the room as Adebayo walked to the podium, his calculated smile revealing perfectly aligned teeth. His speech was meticulously crafted to impress the shareholders. "A man's worth," he declared in a commanding voice, "is measured by the size of his bank account. Any other metric is consolation for failures." Nervous laughter rippled through the audience. Our continent has remained too long tied to outdated traditions that romanticize poverty. Progress means modernization, and modernization demands that we abandon unproductive sentimentalities. From the back of the room, an elderly man dressed in a modest dashiki, a traditional West African robe, watched intently. Despite his simplicity, there was an indescribable dignity in his bearing. No one seemed to notice his presence, except for a young waiter who occasionally exchanged a few respectful words with him. In closing, Adebayo continued, raising his glass, "I propose a toast to the future, a future where Africa finally embraces the only god that truly matters in the modern world, capital." As the crowd applauded enthusiastically, the old man at the back of the hall slowly shook his head and quietly left. Musa Diallo woke up every day before sunrise. At 70, he maintained the discipline that had accompanied him throughout his life. His small apartment on the outskirts of Lagos was simple but impeccably organized, a far cry from the luxurious mansions he had built decades earlier. After his morning meditation, Musa prepared a modest breakfast of millet porridge and dried dates. Looking out the window, he saw the city gradually awakening. Street vendors setting up their stalls, uniformed children walking to school, workers rushing to catch crowded buses. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. "Good morning, old friend," said Mr. Oluwasegun's familiar voice. "How was the ceremony yesterday? I'm sorry I couldn't attend in person." "Revealing," Musa replied in a calm, deep voice. "Young Adebayo has exactly the profile we were hoping for." "Too arrogant?" "Perfectly arrogant," Musa corrected. "Exactly what we need for our experiment. He has the necessary talent, he just lacks the wisdom to direct it properly." "Are you sure you want to go through with this, Musa? You could simply come back and take back control of the company. After all, you're still the majority shareholder, even if very few people know it." Musa smiled, contemplating the collection of African masks that decorated his wall, a souvenir of his travels across the continent. "No, my friend. As the Malian proverb says, the water you give is worth more than the gold you lend. This young man needs a lesson no Western university could teach, and our company needs a leader who understands the true meaning of wealth." After hanging up the phone, Musa picked up his weather-beaten leather briefcase, the only luxury item he had kept from his days as a corporate mogul, and walked toward Mercy Children's Center, the orphanage where he volunteered every morning, teaching math and telling traditional stories to the children. To almost everyone in Lagos, he was just a retired professor, not the legendary founder of Continental Investments, the mysterious billionaire who had disappeared from the corporate world 15 years ago, supposedly to live in seclusion in Europe. The truth was quite different, and much closer. The following Monday, the Continental Investments office was abuzz with rumors. An extraordinary board meeting had been called without prior notice. Adebayo arrived precisely at 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes ahead of schedule, determined to demonstrate his exemplary punctuality. To his surprise, the conference room was already occupied by a single person, the same elderly man in a dashiki who had discreetly observed his presentation days earlier. The old man was calmly leafing through financial reports that were supposed to be confidential. "Excuse me," Adebayo said with barely concealed irritation. "This is a private executive board meeting. You must have the wrong room." The old man looked up calmly and smiled. Adebayo Okonkwo, graduated with honors from Harvard, MBA from Stanford. Acquisition of Nigertech completed 3 months ahead of schedule, saving $30 million. Impressive. Adebayo frowned, disconcerted. "Do you know me?" "I know your resume," the old man replied, "but I don't know the man yet." Before Adebayo could respond, the door opened and CEO Oluwasegun walked in, followed by the other board members. "Ah, I see you've already met our special guest," Oluwasegun said with an enigmatic smile. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have the honor to introduce Professor Musa Diallo, who has kindly agreed to oversee our new initiative." Adebayo watched in disbelief as the powerful executives, people who normally demanded reverence from everyone, greeted the old man with almost deferential respect. "New initiative?" Adebayo asked, trying to maintain his composure. Oluwasegun smiled broadly. "As part of our corporate social responsibility strategy, Continental Investments will launch a pioneering microfinance program in rural communities traditionally excluded from the banking system. And you, Adebayo, as our brightest talent, have been chosen to lead this project." The shock on Adebayo's face was evident. Microfinance? Rural communities? This was completely outside his area of expertise and his interest. He specialized in high-value mergers and acquisitions, not charity for impoverished villages. "Professor Diallo will oversee its progress," Oluwasegun continued. "We consider this project crucial in determining the future leadership of the company." Adebayo felt his stomach sink. His perfectly planned path to the presidency had just been diverted to some irrelevant welfare project, overseen by an old traditionalist who had probably never run anything bigger than a spice shop. "When do I start?" he asked, forcing a smile. "Tomorrow," Professor Diallo replied with an amused glint in his eye. "We'll leave for the village of Abata, 6 hours away. I suggest you take only the essentials. Where we're going, your Italian suits will be inappropriate." The trip to Abata was a true test of Adebayo's patience. The company's luxurious SUV quickly gave way to an aging off-road vehicle once they left the paved roads. The air conditioning worked intermittently, leaving him exposed to the sweltering heat and dust that invaded the vehicle through the partially open windows. "Wouldn't it be more efficient to fly over the region and identify viable areas for investment using geospatial data?" Adebayo asked after hours of awkward silence. Professor Diallo, who seemed completely at ease despite the adverse conditions, smiled. "Efficiency is not always the most important value, young man. As the saying goes, if you want to know the road, ask those who have already returned. To truly understand these communities, we need to walk among them, not fly over them." Adebayo rolled his eyes discreetly. With every mile they drove away from Lagos, he felt further away from civilization and his coveted promotion. When they finally arrived at Abata village, the sun was already setting, painting the sky with orange and purple hues. To Adebayo's surprise, dozens of people awaited his arrival, forming 2 lines leading to the center of the community, where elders sat in a semicircle. "Looks like they've prepared a reception," he commented, straightening his travel-wrinkled shirt. "Not for us," corrected the professor. "For you." "For me? But how did you know?" "Your reputation precedes you," Diallo replied enigmatically. The welcoming ceremony was elaborate and disconcerting for Adebayo. The village chief, a man in his 80s with a carved staff, led rituals in a language he didn't understand. Children danced to the beat of drums while women sang traditional chants. To their astonishment, when Professor Diallo was announced, the community's reverence visibly intensified. The old man received warm hugs and greetings that suggested long-standing familiarity. "You've been here before," Adebayo observed. "Many times," Diallo confirmed. "Abata was my first school long before Harvard or Stanford. It was here that I learned the most valuable lessons about economics and value." Adebayo frowned in confusion. "But this is one of the poorest regions in the country." The professor smiled enigmatically. "Wealth and poverty are relative concepts, young Adebayo. Tomorrow we will begin to expand your definition of both." The alarm on Adebayo's cell phone rang at 6:30 a.m., his usual time in Lagos. He reached over to turn it off, only to discover there was no cell phone signal. The small cabin assigned to him was surprisingly clean, but devoid of all the amenities he was accustomed to. No hot shower, no internet, no air conditioning. After a cold shower that left him more irritated than invigorated, he headed to the meeting point he'd arranged with the professor. To his surprise, the village center was already bustling with activity. Women carrying water, men preparing farm tools, children helping with small tasks before school. Professor Diallo was talking animatedly to a group of women gathered under a large tree. "Ah, Adebayo, you're just in time to meet our first class of entrepreneurs," she called out enthusiastically. Adebayo approached reluctantly, observing the group of approximately 20 women of varying ages, all dressed in colorful traditional cloths. "These are the founders of the Abada Women's Cooperative," Diallo explained. "They have operated an informal revolving credit system for generations. Our goal is to expand and formalize this structure." Striving to convey professional interest, Adebayo began asking questions about transaction volume, default rates, and available collateral. To his surprise, one of the older women, introduced as Mama Kamara, answered with surprising accuracy. "Our default rate is 0, he declared proudly. "In 15 years, we have never lost a single Naira loan." "Impossible," Adebayo countered. "Not even the most sophisticated banks can do that." "Maybe because your banks don't understand the true value of trust," Mama Kamara replied. "Here, a loan isn't just a financial transaction. It's a community bond. When someone can't pay, we don't send debt collectors, we send help." Adebayo smiled condescendingly. "I understand the folksy approach, ma'am, but we're talking about real finances. Without formal billing mechanisms, your system isn't scalable." An uncomfortable silence followed his words. Professor Diallo intervened gently. "Interesting that you mentioned scalability. The cooperative started with 5 women and 500 Naira. Today, it generates the equivalent of $50,000 annually and has helped finance every business we see around us, from a bakery to a community clinic, all without a single formal document." Adebayo looked around, noticing for the first time the variety of small businesses he had initially ignored. Disgusted, he realized his first lesson had just begun. Over the next few days, Adebayo was systematically exposed to different aspects of the local economy. Each morning, Professor Diallo took him to a different business, always introducing him to people whose practical wisdom challenged everything he had learned at his expensive Western universities. On the 5th day, they visited the village school, a modest but surprisingly well-equipped building with solar panels and basic computers. "This school was built entirely with local resources," explained the principal, a man named Ibrahim. "Each family contributed what they could, labor, materials, knowledge." "Impressive," Adebayo admitted, surveying the facilities. "But surely they received outside funding for the equipment." Ibrahim smiled. "In fact, we had a single anonymous benefactor who donated the solar panels and computers. But everything else, from the architectural design to the last roof tile, came from the community itself." As they walked between classrooms, Adebayo observed the children studying with intense concentration. One girl, about 12 years old, raised her hand to answer a complex math question with impressive accuracy. "That's Fatima," Professor Diallo commented. "Mama Kamara's daughter. She has the greatest mathematical potential I've ever seen." Adebayo sat in on the class for a few minutes, genuinely impressed by the level of education. "What will happen to her?" he asked. "With that talent, she should be preparing for international universities." "This is one of the problems we hope to solve with our microfinance program," Director Ibrahim responded. "We have extraordinary talent, but we lack the resources to fully develop it." That afternoon, Adebayo found himself alone with his notes, reviewing everything he had observed over the past few days. For the first time since his arrival, he felt professionally stimulated. There was real potential here, not just for charity, but for truly profitable investments. When Professor Diallo showed up for dinner, he found Adebayo surrounded by papers covered in calculations. "He looks focused," he observed. "I'm redesigning the program," Adebayo explained with unexpected enthusiasm. "If we structure the loans correctly and create a complementary education fund, we could transform this region into a talent hub for all of West Africa." The professor smiled discreetly, pleased with the first sign of change in his reluctant pupil. During their second week in Abada, an unexpected tropical storm completely isolated the village. Roads became impassable, and the only connection to the outside world, a satellite phone in the chief's house, was damaged by lightning. Adebayo watched from his hut window as the relentless rain pounded the village, feeling utterly helpless. In Lagos, a crisis like this would be managed with modern resources, emergency teams, backup generators, organized evacuations. A noise at the door interrupted his thoughts. It was Kofi, a boy of about 10 who often followed him curiously around the village. "Mr. Adebayo," the boy called, soaking wet. "The emergency council is meeting. The professor has requested your presence." "Emergency council?" he asked, confused. "Yes, sir. When we face challenges, everyone comes together to decide together." At the community center, Adebayo found nearly all the village adults gathered in a circle, discussing orderly matters. Professor Diallo noticed his arrival and gestured for him to come closer. "I'm glad you came. We're assigning responsibilities to ensure everyone's safety during the storm." Adebayo was impressed by the meticulous organization. Groups were formed to reinforce vulnerable roofs, collect drinking water, ration food, and care for the elderly and children. There was no panic, only cooperative determination. When asked how he could contribute, Adebayo hesitated. In his professional life, he had always delegated practical tasks to subordinates. "I can help with strategy," he offered uncertainly. "We can optimize resource allocation by prioritizing critical areas and..." He was interrupted by an elderly man shaking his head. "Young man, now we don't need complex words. We need willing hands." Adebayo felt his face burn with embarrassment. Professor Diallo intervened. "Adebayo has experience in logistics. He can help with the distribution of supplies." Thus began one of the longest and most physically exhausting nights of Adebayo's life. In the pouring rain, he carried bags of food, transported medicine, and helped reinforce roofs for vulnerable families. His expensive clothes were ruined, and his hands, accustomed only to keyboards and documents, developed painful blisters. Near dawn, as she distributed dry blankets to a family whose home had been partially damaged, an elderly woman took her injured hands in hers and examined them compassionately. "Young hands doing the work of the ancients," she said in halting English. "A man's true worth is not in what he has, but in what he is willing to give." Exhausted but strangely satisfied, Adebayo realized that for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about money, status, or promotions. He was thinking only about the people who depended on his immediate efforts. The storm persisted for 3 days, during which Adebayo worked tirelessly with the community. When the clouds finally dispersed, the village emerged relatively intact, some structures damaged, but no significant losses thanks to the collective effort. During the community breakfast held to celebrate the end of the storm, Adebayo noticed he was being treated differently. The villagers, who had previously watched him with distant curiosity, now naturally included him in their conversations, offering him food and even joking about his clumsy attempts to help with roof repairs. "Respect needs to be earned, not bought," Professor Diallo commented, observing the interaction. "You've just earned something your money could never buy." That afternoon, while helping clean up storm debris, Adebayo found an old, soggy newspaper near his boss's office. The partially legible cover page featured a photo that immediately caught his eye. A younger man, but unmistakably Professor Diallo, dressed in a smart suit alongside other executives. The partially faded headline announced, "Continental Investments expands into West Africa. Billionaire Musa Diallo promises financial revolution." Adebayo felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath his feet. The elderly man with him, dressed in simple clothes and living without any apparent luxury, was the legendary founder of Continental Investments, a man whose fortune was estimated in the billions and who had mysteriously disappeared from the corporate world more than a decade ago. His mind raced, connecting dots that had previously seemed unconnected. The extraordinary respect shown by company executives, the deep financial knowledge disguised as folk wisdom, the unnamed benefactors who occasionally appeared in village stories. When he met Professor Diallo again, he looked at him with new eyes. "Did you find anything interesting while cleaning?" the old man asked, an amused glint in his eye that suggested he knew exactly what Adebayo had found. "Why would a billionaire choose to live like this?" Adebayo asked directly, unable to contain his bewilderment. The professor smiled, neither denying nor confirming the identity. "Perhaps the real question is, why would anyone choose to live any other way when they discover what truly matters?" By his 3rd week in Abada, Adebayo's routine had changed drastically. He woke at dawn without needing an alarm clock, ate breakfast with his host family, and dedicated his mornings to working on the microfinance program that now genuinely interested him. In the afternoons, he participated in community activities, from basic math classes for adults to planning an improved irrigation system for local crops. His analytical skills, previously dedicated exclusively to maximizing corporate profits, found surprisingly satisfying applications in solving practical community problems. "You look different," Professor Diallo observed as they walked through the cassava fields. "Even your posture has changed." Adebayo reflected for a moment. "I feel useful in a way I've never felt before," he admitted. "In Lagos, my work was abstract. Numbers and spreadsheets, mergers and acquisitions that affected people I'd never meet. Here, I see the direct impact of every decision." That evening, they received an unexpected visit from a delegation from the capital. Among the visitors was Samuel Nkosi, vice president of Continental Investments, and Adebayo's main rival for the CEO succession. "Adebayo, I almost didn't recognize you," Samuel exclaimed with false cordiality. "Fieldwork has really transformed you. You look like a true missionary." The comment, clearly derogatory, was made with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. After the formal dinner with the village chief, Samuel invited Adebayo for a private conversation under the starry sky. "Let's be honest," Samuel said, dropping the pretense of politeness. "This project is a political distraction. The real power remains in Lagos, where I'm building important alliances while you play social worker." Adebayo felt a pang of insecurity. Could it be that he was being deliberately pushed out of the decision-making center? "The succession will be decided in the coming months," Samuel continued. "But I'm willing to offer you a privileged position on my team when I take over. All you need to do is ensure this microfinance project remains modest, nothing that threatens to divert significant resources from our core business." The proposal was clear. Discreetly sabotage the project and you'll be rewarded. The Adebayo of 3 weeks ago would have accepted without hesitation. "I will consider your offer," he replied diplomatically, unable to articulate the confusion of values that now competed in his mind. Later, restless, Adebayo walked to the center of the village where he found Fatima, the young math prodigy, studying by the light of a lantern. "Shouldn't you be sleeping?" he asked. "I have a national competition next week," she explained. "I need to prepare properly." Seeing the determination on the girl's face, Adebayo made a decision. "I can help you with some advanced concepts. I was a regional math champion in my youth." Fatima's eyes lit up, and for hours Adebayo completely forgot about Samuel's proposal, absorbed in equations and theorems that rekindled his own passion for pure knowledge, unrelated to financial interests. The situation in Abada became more complicated when an international delegation arrived unannounced. Representatives of a multinational company interested in acquiring land for large-scale industrial agriculture. The proposal included immediate financial compensation for the community, jobs for some residents, and the construction of basic infrastructure. To Adebayo's surprise, the village chief invited him to participate in the negotiation meeting as the community's financial advisor. Professor Diallo discreetly stayed away. "We trust your expertise to ensure we're not deceived," the chief explained. "You know their language better than we do." Sitting next to the elders, Adebayo listened intently to the corporate presentation. It would be easy to impress the community with grandiose numbers and promises of modernization. 3 weeks earlier, he himself would have considered this kind of agreement inevitable progress. When his turn came to speak, everyone expected him to enthusiastically endorse the proposal. Instead, he raised uncomfortable questions. What is the projected environmental impact for the next 10 years? Do labor contracts include the transfer of technological knowledge? Will the community retain perpetual rights to water sources? The corporate executives were visibly disconcerted. One of them, recognizing Adebayo, asked in confusion, "Aren't you the CFO of Continental Investments? What are you doing here?" "Learning what Harvard didn't teach me," he replied simply. The negotiations lasted 2 days. Adebayo, applying all his financial expertise to the community, helped structure an agreement that limited the extent of the ceded land, guaranteed profit sharing, protected essential natural resources, and included educational scholarships for young talent. As the delegation left, the chief embraced Adebayo with tears in his eyes. "You negotiated like a son of Abada," he declared, "not like someone who arrived only weeks ago." That night, he finally confronted Professor Diallo directly. "You are Musa Diallo, founder of Continental Investments. Why are you living like this when you could have everything money can buy? The old man smiled, without denying it. I've had everything money can buy, Adebayo. I've discovered it's surprisingly little. What really matters, genuine respect, purpose, human connection, no bank account can buy. But the company, its billions, they're still there, Diallo confirmed, working through anonymous foundations, funding schools like the one in Abada, community clinics, microcredit programs. Money is a magnificent tool when it serves life, not when life serves it. Adebayo gazed at the stars above, unusually bright away from the light pollution of Lagos. Why me? He asked finally. Why did you choose me for this lesson? Because I saw in you the same mistake I made in my youth, Diallo replied. The same extraordinary talent driven by the same misunderstanding of value. And because I believe Continental Investments deserves a leader who understands both the power of capital and its limitations. The last month in Abada passed quickly. The microfinance project was fully structured, with principles that respected local traditions while introducing modern financial innovations. Adebayo had worked tirelessly, applying his expertise in ways he never imagined possible. One morning, he received an unexpected call on his newly repaired satellite phone. It was CEO Oluwasegun. The board has called a special presentation in 2 weeks, he said. All succession candidates will present their visions for the company's future. This is your opportunity to demonstrate what you've learned. Adebayo felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. After nearly 2 months immersed in the reality of Abada, Lagos seemed a world away. As he was packing his belongings for departure, he was surprised by a procession of locals heading to his hut. They brought modest gifts, a handmade basket, a traditional textile, and seeds of local plants. To remember us when you return to your world, Mama Kamara explained. The most emotional farewell was to Fatima, who had won the national mathematics competition with his help. You said that mathematics is the universal language, the girl reminded him. I promise that one day we will speak this language in the best universities in the world. On the way back to Lagos, Professor Diallo remained silent for long periods, allowing Adebayo to absorb the transition. The landscape gradually transformed, lush vegetation giving way to peripheral settlements, and finally to the skyscrapers of the financial center. How does it feel to be back? He asked finally. Adebayo gazed at the urban skyline. As if I were seeing it all for the first time, he replied honestly. The building seemed simultaneously impressive and empty. The Continental Investments headquarters felt strangely alien to Adebayo when he returned. The polished marble, the whisper-quiet elevators, the perfectly tuned air conditioning. Everything conveyed a sense of artificiality he'd never noticed before. His colleagues greeted him with distant curiosity. Some commented on his transformed appearance, the deep tan, the more relaxed posture, the absence of the expensive accessories he had previously considered indispensable. Samuel Nkosi watched him with barely concealed suspicion. Our missionary has returned from the jungle, he commented sarcastically during the executive lunch. I imagine you're eager to get back to real civilization. Adebayo smiled serenely. It depends on what you consider civilization, Samuel. In the following days, he dedicated himself entirely to preparing his presentation. To his assistant's dismay, he refused to use standard corporate templates and requested data that the company had never prioritized. Social impact of investments, long-term sustainability, measurable community benefits. On the eve of the big presentation, he received an unexpected visitor in his office, his former mentor, Dr. Okafor, who had recruited him to the company straight out of college. You're different, Adebayo, the mentor observed after a few minutes of conversation. More present. Let's just say my priorities have been recalibrated. Dr. Okafor hesitated, then said in a low voice, You know who Professor Diallo really is, don't you? Adebayo nodded. Few know this story, the mentor continued. 15 years ago, at the height of his success, Musa Diallo disappeared after a profound existential crisis. He sold his mansions, his cars, his artwork. Rumors said he had retired to Europe. In reality, he returned to his roots, visiting traditional villages across Africa, relearning ancestral values, seeking a deeper purpose for his wealth. And for your company, Adebayo finished, finally understanding. Exactly. Continental Investments doesn't just need a technically competent CEO. It needs someone who understands the true mission Diallo envisioned, to use the power of capital to uplift entire communities, not just shareholders. That night, Adebayo reviewed his presentation one last time, aware that he was about to fundamentally challenge the conventional view of corporate success that he himself had passionately championed just 2 months earlier. Continental Investments' main auditorium was packed. Board members, key shareholders, and senior management occupied the front rows. Business journalists and financial analysts eagerly awaited the presentations that would define the future of one of Africa's largest companies. Samuel Nkosi presented first, a stunning vision of aggressive expansion, strategic acquisitions, and maximizing shareholder returns. Sophisticated charts showed exponential growth projections. The audience applauded enthusiastically. When Adebayo's turn came, an expectant hush fell over the room. Everyone expected the once ambitious and ruthless CFO to present an even more aggressive strategy than his competitor. Instead, he began surprisingly. "What is true wealth?" he asked, watching confused expressions emerge among the executives. "For years, I believed the answer lay in the numbers we chase daily: market value, profit margins, return on investment. 2 months ago, I would have argued with absolute conviction that money is the only true measure of success." He paused, his gaze sweeping the auditorium. I was deeply mistaken. Over the next 40 minutes, Adebayo presented a radically different vision for the future of Continental Investments, a model that integrated traditional African finance principles with modern market instruments, creating a balance between shareholder value creation and transformative social impact. His slides featured not only financial charts, but also real-life stories of communities transformed, talents discovered, and ecosystems preserved. Each proposed initiative was meticulously grounded in economic feasibility analyses that demonstrated how social responsibility and sustainable profit could reinforce each other. True financial innovation in the 21st century will not come from more sophisticated algorithms or more complex derivative instruments, Adebayo concluded. It will come from a return to fundamental principles that our traditional communities have preserved for generations: interdependence, long-termism, and the recognition that financial capital is just one among many valuable resources. When he finished, the initial silence gradually turned to applause, at first hesitant, then growing in intensity. Several council members exchanged impressed glances, but the biggest surprise was yet to come. CEO Oluwasegun stood up and announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, before we continue with our deliberations, I would like to introduce a special guest who will be present at our decision." The doors at the back of the auditorium opened, and Professor Diallo entered, no longer wearing his traditional dashiki, but an elegant suit that accentuated his imposing presence. A buzz ran through the room as many recognized, with shock, the legendary founder. "Musa Diallo," Oluwasegun announced formally, "founder of Continental Investments and still our main shareholder." Enthusiastic applause filled the auditorium as Diallo walked calmly onto the stage. His serene smile contrasted with the stunned expressions of most in attendance. "I built this company 40 years ago," Diallo began, his deep voice reverberating through the quiet auditorium. "I started with an office the size of a closet and an unshakable conviction that Africa deserved world-class financial institutions, built by Africans for Africans." He walked slowly across the stage, making eye contact with council members. "For decades, I measured success the same way you all do: annual growth, strategic acquisitions, international expansion. I accumulated more wealth than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. I had mansions on 3 continents, private jets, art collections valued in the millions." He paused significantly. "And each morning, I woke feeling an inexplicable emptiness, until I understood the fundamental truth my ancestors had always known. Wealth without purpose is poverty disguised as abundance." Diallo explained how his journey of self-discovery had taken him back to his roots, living in traditional villages, relearning ancestral values, and developing a new vision of integrated prosperity. "I didn't return to choose a successor who would simply perpetuate conventional business models. I returned to find someone capable of leading the next evolution of Continental Investments, an institution that honors both market principles and ancient African wisdom." Looking at Adebayo, he continued, "2 months ago, I met a brilliant young man who sincerely believed that money is the only true measure of success in life. Today, I witnessed the introduction of a leader who understands that true value transcends balance sheets." To everyone's surprise, Diallo didn't immediately announce a winner. Instead, he revealed his unexpected decision. Continental Investments will not have a single CEO. We will implement a collaborative leadership model inspired by the governance structures of our traditional communities. The succession plan designated different executives for complementary areas of the company, creating a leadership council where important decisions would be made collectively. Samuel Nkosi would lead the conventional investments division, leveraging his undeniable talent for complex financial transactions. Adebayo, in turn, would take over as director of the newly created Integrated Investments Division, responsible for developing financial models that combine economic returns with measurable social impact. This is not a charity or public relations division, Diallo clarified firmly. This is the future of our company, and I believe of African capitalism. The challenge of creating truly inclusive prosperity requires both analytical rigor and a deep understanding of fundamental human values. A year later, Adebayo returned to Abata for the inauguration of the first Community Financial Innovation Center, a hybrid institution that combined microcredit, financial education, local business incubation, and the preservation of traditional economic knowledge. Fatima, the young math prodigy, was among the first scholarship recipients of the program, which now financed advanced education for exceptional rural talent. She proudly presented her algorithm design, inspired by traditional rotating saving systems. During the inauguration ceremony, conducted according to local rituals, Adebayo surprised everyone by speaking fluently in the regional dialect he had learned over the past few months. The true wealth of a community, he declared, is not in its material resources, but in the collective wisdom that spans generations. Our mission is not to replace traditional systems with imported models, but to create a respectful bridge between different forms of knowledge. The center quickly became a model replicated across several regions of West Africa, creating a network of financial innovation genuinely rooted in African values. At Continental Investments' annual award ceremony the following year, Adebayo was again invited to speak. To the audience's astonishment, he politely declined the prestigious Most Profitable Executive trophy, which he had obsessively coveted in the past. In its place, it established a new recognition category, the Integral Impact Leadership Award, celebrating employees who demonstrated an exceptional ability to simultaneously generate financial value, human well-being, and environmental sustainability. Musa Diallo's true legacy, Adebayo concluded, gazing at his mentor seated in the front row, is not the billions amassed or the buildings constructed. It is the profound understanding that true abundance manifests itself in the quality of our relationships, the integrity of our choices, and the wisdom of recognizing that, as the old proverb teaches, the richest man is not he who has the most, but he who needs the least. As the audience applauded enthusiastically, Adebayo reflected on his extraordinary journey. From a young executive obsessed with status and material wealth, to a leader who understood the deeper meaning of prosperity. The most valuable lesson he had learned came not from Harvard or Stanford, but from a billionaire who chose to live simply to rediscover the true essence of value, and who, in the process, transformed not just a company, but the definition of success for an entire generation of African leaders.